Venezuela Reportback today. We're going to hear today from Allison, who is someone who violated Trump's no-fly zone and actually traveled to Venezuela very recently, right before the attacks, to see what was actually going on there and to report back, which is a very brave thing to do. And it's going to be really incredible to hear from her experiences there today. I also want to just thank everybody for coming out today. I know it's been an extremely stressful last week or so here in Minneapolis. So thank you for coming out today to hear about what's going on in Venezuela. I want to start off. I'm Andrew, by the way. I'm an organizer with the Anti-War Committee. And I do want to start off in saying that in light of the murder of Renee Good and the open ICE terror that's just ripping through Minneapolis right now, that the fact that the Trump administration bombed Venezuela and kidnapped its president in the same week that it began this assault on Minneapolis isn't just like a random coincidence or two totally disconnected things. Both those attacks on Venezuela and on immigrants here in the U.S. are both manifestations of U.S. imperialism. Venezuela itself is striven to build a democratic, egalitarian country that's driven by people power and a government that serves working people rather than the rich. And the U.S., what's it doing is trying to transform it back into a country that's dominated by the U.S. and by U.S. Oil companies and other wealthy corporations. Likewise, ICE terror in the United States is intended to, keep immigrants down, to keep people in their place, right? To keep them working the worst jobs for illegally low pay, to make wealthy business owners a lot of money. And the Anti-War Committee stands with our immigrant community and demands a legalization for all and takes to the streets for immigrant rights, because we don't think that our fight for a world free of imperialist terror can be separated from what's going on in the U.S. itself. That being said, I'm up here as kind of do the introductions and MC today because I actually myself had the good fortune of being sent on an international solidarity delegation to Venezuela just about 2 years ago in the winter of 2023. And I particularly call it good fortune because right now we're swimming in this sea of lies coming from the Trump administration, who are taking every possible angle to undermine Venezuela's government, and particularly its president, Nicolas Maduro. It really, really does help to have been there yourself, to have seen things with your own eyes. Because, when the U.S. is going to war, I personally don't believe a word that it says about the people it's attacking. Or how the war is for freedom and democracy and all the usual shit the U.S. spews. But it really does give you a sense of confidence in your judgment when you've actually been there and know for an absolute fact that the propaganda you're hearing just is a lie. For one thing, I saw for myself that the U.S. didn't just start its assault on Venezuela on Saturday the 3rd. Venezuela has been under sanctions by the U.S. for more than a decade, and the sanctions have only gotten worse and worse. For those who aren't familiar with the term, international sanctions are a way the U.S. effectively bars countries from trading with a country that the U.S. has in its crosshairs. So if you trade with Venezuela, the U.S. won't trade with you, and it won't trade with anyone who trades with you. Like it's contagious, like a virus, which makes it so countries are kind of forced into a position where they won't trade with countries like Venezuela. And what this has meant is Venezuela has been unable to sell the billions of gallons of oil it possesses, or its industrial products, or anything else except to countries that are willing to stand up and defy those sanctions, like Iran or China, among others. And it also has meant that that Venezuela has not been able to import food or medicine or chemicals and machine parts, all the things that you kind of need to keep an economy running, right? If people here remember what it was like in the U.S. At the very beginning of the COVID pandemic, when the economy kind of ground to a halt and international trade ground to a halt, and you saw stores empty. It's like that, but on a much more severe scale, and just going on forever and ever and ever. In fact, the U.S. wouldn't even let those sanctions up during COVID, when they prevented medicine and vaccines and masks and everything from getting into the country. The best data that I could find estimates conservatively that just in 1 year of the sanctions, between 2017 and 2018, 40,000 people were killed as a direct result of that economic warfare. And when I was actually there, I met person after person who had a horror story about how bad things had been, who had lost kids or lost parents, or had gone without adequate food. So the attacks are not new. And what I also saw was people standing up to defy those U.S. attacks and who were united with their government's defiance of the U.S. Overwhelmingly, the people that I met, not just in arranged appointments or anything, but just random people I talked to on the street or in bars or cafes, told me that they supported the government, or even that they were Chavistas, people who sort of uphold the legacy of Hugo Chavez, who was elected in 1998 and kicked out the U.S. oil companies and said Venezuela was going to use its wealth to make its own people prosperous rather than line the pockets of U.S. companies. Overwhelmingly, people told me that they supported President Maduro, that they were worried the U.S. would make things worse in their country again because they didn't want to go back to the way things were before the Bolivarian Revolution, before Chavez came into office. Back before Chavez, the government massacred people in the streets. There were significant massacres of people demanding a better life. And when you have traveled through the country, you can really see why people stand up to defend it. I saw massive housing projects all over Venezuela, built to ensure that everyone in the country could have can own a cheap, well-built home with modern amenities. The Maduro administration has built 5 million homes, I believe, so far, and about half of that is just in the past couple of years. Like, this is a project that's ramping up speed. The country used to rely on imported food because of its oil export-based economy, and when U.S. sanctions threatened mass starvation, the Venezuelan government created a program to provide at least a basic subsistence level of food to Venezuelans, set up building a national agricultural base from the ground up. Venezuela now can export food, right? And that happened very rapidly. I met with peasants who had been handed over land previously owned by wealthy landlords and U.S. corporations and given free rein to farm it with collective ownership, with the government providing as much support and tractors and tools and agricultural supplies as it could. I saw people attending health fairs where they could get free dental checkups and surgery, free medicine and vaccines, free medical appliances like wheelchairs, free diapers and strollers and cribs. And all of this is being done by a government that the U.S. has painted as evil and dictatorial, that they say steals from its people, right? And all of this is being built even under this extreme pressure. And I just don't buy a word of these lies after having actually been there. The U.S. has supported a whole string of coups in Venezuela. President Maduro himself has faced assassination attempts. The U.S. at one time claimed a minor politician named Juan Guaido was the real president of Venezuela for a couple years before the U.S. gave that up. The U.S. has kidnapped a Venezuelan diplomat who is getting international deals for food aid for the country. And the sanctions the whole time have never let up. And now we've got a Navy fleet off the coast. We've been killing, bombing Venezuelan fishing boats, killing random people out just fishing. We have bombed the capital city of Caracas, killing about 100 people. And of course, we have kidnapped the elected president of the country. And we here in the U.S., we have a duty to stand up for what's right and stand with Venezuela, because in fact, people in Venezuela, I heard this, Allison I think is going to talk about this, say that they stand with us. They stand with people in the U.S. against our imperialist government. And I think that that's going to be a really important point of what we're going to hear about today. So with that, I want to hand it over to kind of the star of the show, Allison. Please give her a hand.
Thank you, Andrew. As Andrew said, my name is Allison Gunderson, and I am a member of the Minnesota Anti-War Committee. I'm also a member of Women Against Military Madness, their Palestine Solidarity Committee. I want to thank you all for coming out to hear this report back. I was honored to go on this delegation. It was life-changing, even though it was cut short. The U.S. blockade, plus Trump declaring a no-fly zone, cut our trip down to just 2.5 days. And a lot of people on the delegation were not able to get to Venezuela. I'm happy to be sharing what I learned with you, all in solidarity with Venezuela, especially now after the kidnapping of their democratically elected President Nicolas Maduro and the bombing of Caracas, which is where I spent all of my time in Venezuela, where I met so many new friends and where I've never witnessed stronger solidarity. I'm just gonna go day by day, kind of in order of all the things we got to do. It'll be kind of an overview, but of course there's going to be a Q&A afterwards, so I can go more in depth in that section if anyone's got any further questions. I also just want to say like one more thing before we begin. As anti-imperialists and kind of as Andrew alluded to earlier, I think we know the attacks on Venezuela and the attacks on immigrants here with the US and ICE do not happen in a vacuum. We know they're all rooted in one cause, and that's US imperialism. The same people saying Palestinians are all terrorists and have no right to resist are the same people saying that Venezuelans are criminals, and that President Maduro is an illegitimate president and a drug trafficker. They're the same people saying that immigrants are violent criminals. And everyone from Kristi Noem to J.D. Vance all the way up to Trump are labeling Renee Good a domestic terrorist. And they're the same people who are about to deploy the National Guard on protesters for standing up to this US imperial violence. Every innocent life taken in Palestine, every innocent life taken defending the Bolivarian Revolution, and every innocent life taken by the hands of ICE and MPD all serves to feed the same bloodthirsty monster that is US imperialism. And these struggles are very connected. So with that, I'm going to get into my actual report. We got to attend the People's Assembly for Peace and Sovereignty in Our Americas. The conference featured many speakers and organizers from over 50 countries, including Haiti, Argentina, Cuba, Mali, among many others. As I mentioned earlier, Trump's no-fly zone declaration, the continued US repression, and the already existing US blockade made travel very difficult. This is actually going to be the biggest delegation ever sent to Venezuela. It was going to be about 50 people from the US, and only 11 of us got to go. Yeah. But despite all the barriers put up by the Trump administration, there are still over 500 people who travel from all over the world to stand in solidarity with Venezuela against US imperialism and make it to this conference. This was kind of like, they had many different rooms, but it was mostly like panels, lots of celebrating, and this was just a few of us who made it on the first day. We were all kind of flying in on various flights, different times, different days, so we randomly all got to meet up. And this was just one of my favorite quotes that I think summed up the whole conference, which was unity today, unity tomorrow, and unity the day after that. The conference's primary themes and goals were building unity and international solidarity in the struggle against US imperialism, particularly around US escalations in the Caribbean and in Venezuela, but of course solidarity with struggles worldwide. Blanca Eakout, president of the Simón Bolívar Institute for Peace and Solidarity Among Peoples, which is an organization that's advocating for peace, solidarity, and human rights in Venezuela. She said in one panel that we must unite under a single cause, stressing that we cannot let US imperialism divide us. The conference was mostly panels with lots of breaks for networking and socializing, and several opportunities for attendees to step up and speak to the audiences about anything they wanted to address. One person in our delegation actually got to do that and share our solidarity with Venezuela. There's also a live band and a lot of celebrating, a lot of dancing. This is just kind of like what the main conference room looked like. You can see a bunch of different flags represented. Lots of Palestine flags represented. Lots of Chavez represented. This is us. We got to actually march in with this banner on the first day, and we kind of led like a little march with like probably 100 people. Lots of Venezuelans joined us and started leading chants, and we just kind of walked around that main room conference. We were able to meet and talk with several different folks, including Venezuelan fishermen and women, and that's who we are with in this photo. These are working class people trying to feed their families and are being falsely labeled as narco traffickers. The U.S. has been using this label to target this working class fishermen to justify bombing their fishing boats. The U.S. has killed over 100 innocent civilians in these bombings. These fishermen and women explained that they're not scared of U.S. aggression and that they're going to continue to fish in the Caribbean Sea to provide for their families and demonstrate their economic sovereignty. There were several journalists and news outlets at the conference giving interviews, so we got to give a ton of interviews and really get our message of being out there to stand in solidarity with Venezuela and let them know that over 70% of U.S. people do not want this war. Journalists and attendees were especially interested in talking with U.S. anti-imperialists. They were really excited to hear that there's a large anti-war movement that stands with them and that Trump does not speak for the U.S. people. Rander Panay, the Venezuelan vice minister for Latin American affairs, spoke on one panel which focused on the Monroe Doctrine and the U.S. renewal of it. They explained that it is a project that seeks to eradicate the self-determination of Latin American nations for the benefit of U.S. imperialism. They went through the U.S. strategy document, a document outlining the U.S. plan to try to maintain global dominance. It focuses on Latin America as a target for the U.S., and evokes the Monroe Doctrine, which is a 200-year-old colonial doctrine that essentially states that Latin America should be controlled by the U.S., meaning the U.S. says who is in charge, gets to decide what is done with the land and resources. And this recent bombing and kidnapping, and now new threats to Cuba and Colombia, that they may be next if they don't fall in line with U.S. interests, are pretty clear examples of this. I was actually wearing translating headphones for this conference, and even the translator apologized for what they were about to say before they translated this person reading out the U.S. document, which I think highlights how heinous it is. Pretty disgusting. Sorry, my mouth is super dry. Panay emphasized that this is contrary to Bolivarianism, which he described as a light for the people of Latin America to create the basis of peace on the foundations of unity and justice. Fermin Martinez, a professor at the University of Havana in Cuba, spoke about the close connections between Cuba and Venezuela. He described the current conditions of the U.S. and said that Trump was a symptom of a dying U.S. imperialism. Trump is a reflection of the internal changes taking place within the U.S. as it weakens, and how these changes with the country's international relations, it's creating more open violence and domination of the global countries. I think we are now actually seeing this play out as we watch Trump immediately after kidnapping President Maduro, probably feeling really high and mighty, pivoting to Cuba and saying that the end is nigh for Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel. Cuba and Venezuela have stood together against U.S. aggression since Hugo Chavez was elected. 30 Cubans were killed in the attack on Caracas, some of them in the bombings, but others in direct combat with U.S. troops who had come to kidnap Maduro. Excuse me. And they fought to defend Venezuela because they knew if Venezuela is turned into a U.S. colony, that the U.S. would come for them next. These are actually, these two in the middle and this woman on the left, my left, I guess, were all like Cuban ambassadors that we got to meet at the conference. This was just a photo we got to take with them. There were also many speakers who talked about the similar struggles of the people of Venezuela and the people of Palestine against U.S. imperialism and Zionism. There were a lot of Palestine flags and keffiyehs all around the conference. The opposition within Venezuela has ties to Israel. We see this with Maria Machado, an opposition leader who just won the Nobel Peace Prize, who has been a vocal supporter of Israel, and especially the genocide in Gaza, and has even called for intervention in her own country by Israel. The conference finished on a really powerful note. The foreign minister of Venezuela, Ivan Gil, said in response to the Monroe Doctrine, there must be the Bolivarian doctrine, the doctrine of the people, the doctrine of sovereignty. And Vice President Delcy Rodriguez stated that the people of Venezuela will remain steadfast and that the attacks by the U.S. will not scare them, which we of course are seeing now as she has taken over as interim president and has publicly promised to continue the Bolivarian revolution and is demanding the return of President Maduro in the face of U.S. aggression. After the conference, the women, including trans women and also non-binary folks from our delegation, were invited to join other internationalists at the Venezuelan Ministry of Popular Power for Women to learn from leaders of the women's movement and come together in celebration of women's struggles around the world. This is actually a photo of us with the Minister of Popular Power for Women. So yeah, we got to meet with leaders of the women's movement there. There was a speech given by the Minister of Popular Power for Women, Yeltsin Hernandez, who was just that woman in the last photo. She spoke mostly about the state of the women's struggle in Venezuela, the pillars of their work for women's power and gender equality. There was a lot of emphasis on women being at the forefront of the democratic process and social development. I would say the theme of the dinner was celebrating and uniting all women's struggles under U.S. imperialism. She really emphasized that we all have the same enemy in U.S. imperialism. She was saying the same imperialism targeting Venezuela is the same that exploits labor, steals resources, and destroys the environment elsewhere. I did learn that there are at least 10 women in every communal council in Venezuela. I think this really highlights how high women's participation is within government. It's not uncommon, even as we see Vice President Delcy Rodriguez step in for President Maduro. Excuse me. And yet the U.S. is still in a state where women's participation is something really special, or it's making history, or it's controversial. Whereas a country people in the U.S. seems to think has bad human rights or is really behind on social times, has been doing this for a while. And as Vice President Delcy Rodriguez steps in, no one is batting an eye. In fact, she has the majority of the country fully behind her. This is just some celebrating right when we got there. I'm gonna take another drink of water. It's really stuck with me after this event, seeing the support that Venezuela gives women through things like creating a ministry for popular power for women, seeing how involved and supported women are in the democratic process, and even just down to like being able to receive healthcare. And then thinking of the U.S., who often uses like oppression of women as an excuse to go to war, like in Iran. But we hardly see resources like this for women in our country. In fact, they're being stripped away. I think of Roe v. Wade. Our country also enacts sanctions that kill 500,000 people each year, often with women being hit the hardest by not being able to receive necessary supplies like birth control or menstrual products, or even epidural anesthetics for childbirth just because of these sanctions. I got to ask one woman what it was like living under the threat of US invasion, and she kind of shrugged it off and said that this is nothing new. They have been living under sanctions, threats from the US for years. They are on alert and they are getting organized. Women are enlisting and they're a huge part of this fight, but that they were gonna still celebrate Christmas and have joy, and that they were ready for US attacks. And again, there was lots of dancing, there was a live band, there was limboing. It was very funny. I was limboing with the Minister of Popular Power for Women, which was kind of badass. It was awesome. But it was like all of this celebration in between these like really powerful international solidarity and anti-imperialist speeches, and they were so welcoming. It was just like a huge party. They served us traditional Venezuelan Christmas dinner. But I like really learned that Caribbean time is really a thing. We went there for dinner and danced for 2 hours before we ate. But it was amazing how interwoven everything was. Like 1 minute dance party, the next an incredibly inspiring and on the nose speech about anti-imperialism, and then eating dinner and joking, and then right back to the fight again. It was really cool. This is Yeltsin during her speech. More of the celebration and partying. And then we got to tour the commune the next day. This was Comuna El Panal, excuse me. Officially formed in 2006, Alexis Gonzalez helped start this commune, but he was actually assassinated defending Chavez in the 2002 coup attempt of him. This was just like a really cool mural of him and Che and Simon Bolivar, kind of like his eyes there, which is like right at the beginning of the entrance to the commune. And then this is just like Alexis Vive was painted like all over. And this was like the gate entrance to the commune. This is kind of off to the right here. There was a really cool Palestine mural just right outside. I think it just really highlights the like solidarity that's built into Caracas, built into these communes. It was like everywhere. This was right across the street, and it just says like honor and glory to the Palestinian resistance. I just thought it was really cool overlooking like the rest of the city. I felt like it was kind of like a great depiction of what Caracas seems to like stand for. So yeah, Venezuela believes communes are a part of their path to socialism. Chavez put a lot of emphasis building up and funding communes in the late 2000s after visiting and finding inspiration from communes in Paris, China, and Italy. Chavez himself actually visited this commune as they were like establishing before Chavez really shifted to communes, and saw how well this system would work nationally to create popular power from the ground up, which is the goal of these communal councils and communes, is to build popular power. They see this as carrying on the spirit of the Bolivarian Revolution and slowly transforming the state to socialism by creating systems that give people the collective power to determine their own fate. Communes in Venezuela are probably a little bit different than what the average American thinks of when they think of a commune, or at least it was to me before I went on this trip. They're essentially an area or neighborhood that is self-sustaining and produces for the country. They are funded by the government until they can be self-sustaining and on their own. There is a communal council for each commune. And there are currently 19,500 councils amongst more than 4,000 communes. Communes have self-governance and control over the means of their own production. There was a saying and a chant that was frequent most places we went that was communal or nada, meaning commune or nothing, just to put an emphasis on how much of a focus is put on communes and the belief the country has in them. Like, people who had positions in government would be saying this all the time. Another cool thing is that these particular blocks in this commune, this building, they were built during the dictatorship of Marco Perez Jimenez by the working class, but of course not for the working class. And after the working class overthrew the dictatorship, they took these apartments for their own. I just thought that was pretty awesome. This neighborhood was a main part of a lot of struggles through the 60s, through the 90s. This area was penetrated by a lot of drug trafficking via the CIA in the 80s and 90s. And this neighborhood was a huge part of liberating themselves from drug trafficking. I really want to point that out with all the misinformation that's put forward about Venezuela and drug trafficking. They really put forth a tremendous struggle against this and have virtually eradicated it. Even according to a 2025 UN report, working class people put themselves on the line in most cases with armed struggle to fight against drug trafficking in their country. I think that's really important to highlight. We were able to meet with members of the commune, and each US member got to introduce ourselves and talk about the organizing work we do in the states for Venezuela, for Palestine, and against US imperialism. And of course, immediately when we got there was tons of dancing for like an hour with like a live band, like people playing drums over here. And yeah, people were going hard. But yeah, this is kind of the circle that we all got to like sit in and meet, and everybody introduce themselves. We got to hear this member speak about their recent trip to LA. They spoke about the importance of having international solidarity and unity with each other, and how important it is that Venezuela has unity and solidarity with the people of the United States. They see how we struggle under US imperialism. He said that they may have bad conditions under US sanctions and blockades and having fishing boats being bombed and the threat of invasion, but they have people power and a government who puts their resources into the people. And they see how we do not have that and how we suffer as our government chooses war over taking care of our people. They see how our government's invading our own cities with the National Guard, how immigrants are treated with ICE raids, and how police murder our black and brown comrades. That was cool. He was like showing off this souvenir he got from LA, which was a shirt that had a luchador on it, putting an ICE agent in a headlock. And it just said, "Fuck ICE." He was like really proud of it. He also said he saw so many homeless folks, one in particular under a large corporation skyscraper, and he said he couldn't think of a better example to show US imperialism. And then he talked with people, like one person who was working themselves to death with 3 jobs and still couldn't afford food and a place to live. They demonstrated such incredible solidarity with us. I'm really not doing it justice by just speaking about it. And I've been talking about solidarity a lot, so I want to be really clear when I say solidarity and when Venezuelans say solidarity. It means in the sense of having mutual recognition and an understanding that we have common interests and common struggles versus having pity, or US folks having pity on Venezuelans and their conditions. We can have solidarity with Venezuela and vice versa by understanding how we both struggle under US imperialism. In the US, the money, like our tax dollars, we could have for education or healthcare or housing, instead goes to war and bombing places like Venezuela, just to get Trump and oil companies and Wall Street richer, making the lives and conditions of both Venezuela and the people of the US worse. That's like a really basic, broad thing, but I just want to be clear. It was really cool. We got to tour everywhere. They had a textile shop. This guy gave a really great speech inside the textile shop. I think like my favorite thing that he said was like they knew that they were gonna win and they could hold up a huge fight against the US, because even though the US has like major artillery and huge like they can just bomb, do whatever from airstrikes, but they have consciousness and they have like love for their country. And I thought that was super powerful. It's super true. This is just more people within the textile shop. They had murals like all throughout. Lots of Che, lots of Chavez, lots of Simone Bolivar, lots of stuff for Palestine. This was another comrade of theirs in the commune. They told the story. This is like one of those buildings I showed earlier. They're super tall. So this building goes like really up high, and they said that this comrade died like struggling in one of those battles, like defending their commune. And he got pushed over the side of one of the balconies up high, and he actually like fell right here, and this is where he died, like defending the commune. And this was just a really nice mural. And then this was kind of like towards the end. They just had like so many beautiful murals of Palestine. Oh yeah, there was also a lot of stray cats and dogs hanging out. They were really nice. Yeah, this was a really cool one of Layla Khalid. And then this was just some of the other like surrounding buildings that I got to take a picture of in the mountains. But after that, we got whisked away very quickly to go see President Maduro speak, which was very awesome. He spoke at a different commune, the Amila Vaca commune. And he spoke on the wins of this commune and the commune system in general. He mentioned they were able to successfully get clean water, that they had a pharmacy, they had a textile shop, a hardware store. I even saw a game room where 2 kids were playing FIFA on a PS5. They were just hanging out. He mentioned that the government invested more than $90 billion that year into communes all over Venezuela, and he announced new building condition initiatives for communes. I think that just really highlights like how much is being invested into the people. He also stressed unity across all struggles with the people of the United States against U.S. imperialism. He shouted out our U.S. delegation and Freedom Road Socialist Organization in the U.S. for their solidarity work for Venezuela. He also mentioned other countries in attendance, including Lebanon, Cuba, Argentina, Russia, Haiti. There were a ton of different countries represented. He also spoke on the U.S. oil tanker seizure that happened while we were out there and called it what it was, robbery, that the U.S. stole this oil to profit off of and attack Venezuelan sovereignty. That tanker of oil was also aid to Cuba. I think that just highlights like affecting and sanctioning like one country, Venezuela, is also hurting Cuba and all these other countries that they have really close connections with, and they're aiding each other. Another thing that struck out to me was that there was little security there. There were no barriers between the people and President Maduro. We got briefly patted down, and they did have some security people with Maduro, but they were not blocking him off from anyone or even crowding the president as he walked down the street, shaking hands with folks and greeting them. Like that was him just walking down the street. Like even the stage he spoke on was very close to the audience and only a couple steps up without barriers. It's kind of like an example there. Like really he was just hanging out. He was truly among the people. He was very fun, joking, and of course there was lots of dancing and music as well. It's kind of a theme everywhere. I keep comparing this to seeing a president speak in the US and how blocked off they are physically from the people and the intense measures that go into their security. President Maduro was not what the US media portrays him to be. Everyone I talked to loved President Maduro and were incredibly supportive of their government. Seeing President Maduro speak about bringing Venezuela together and how much they have invested into the commune system, and seeing firsthand how immersed with the people he was, like I don't think a dictator or an illegitimate leader who apparently the majority of Venezuela hates would leave himself so vulnerable to the people who want him out. Additionally, President Maduro is arming his citizens. I don't think dictators arm their citizens like they would turn their guns on them, right? So these claims don't make sense to me with what I've seen firsthand, what I heard from Venezuelans I talked with, and what I've read. Seeing President Maduro speak about building unity in Venezuela and unity with Cuba and Palestine and the people of the US's struggle, talking about peace, not war, actual investments into people like the commune system and the Ministry for Popular Power for Women, tangible ways to give power back to the people. It's really made me sick to come home and hear Trump's disgusting and racist rhetoric about Venezuelans being criminals, and then seeing the US bomb Caracas and kidnap President Maduro and start a war that over 70% of Americans do not want. Like Trump's rhetoric is about war and division, and I couldn't think of a more night and day example of the differences between Venezuela and the US and how President Maduro does not fit the narrative the US media is putting on him. One more thing I heard from multiple people throughout all events was the sentiment that after Chavez is the people, meaning leaders are of course important, but it is ultimately about the people. The people are the revolution. They were there before Chavez, they were there before Maduro, and as we see, the Bolivarian Revolution will be standing there long after. The US really thinks that it can just go into Venezuela and kidnap President Maduro, but they are wrong. The people are still defending it now. So I guess my overall takeaways is that everyone I encountered, everyday people at the commune, at the dinner, where I saw President Maduro speak, they all had such an incredible baseline understanding of imperialism, and that US imperialism is the root cause to their conditions and the conditions of the people of the US. These people who are under really heavy US sanctions and US blockade, who are being bombed, who don't have clean water, see the conditions that we are under, and they have solidarity against this with us. I just think we should let that sink in and really think about the conditions that we face in this country too. But they understood how all our struggles are connected. Venezuela is truly an example of having unity against US imperialism, of a country who puts the people first even in the face of US sanctions, blockades, bombings, and kidnappings, and how to successfully stay united as a country and fight against attacks from imperialism for liberation for all. My biggest takeaway is how important it is that we need to build this unity here in a strong anti-imperialist and anti-war movement, and that it is long past time for us to have this strong of solidarity with Venezuela. So thank you for coming to hear about my trip. And I want to end on Viva Venezuela and Free President Maduro. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Allison. I really want to emphasize, like, the U.S. really doesn't want people to hear these perspectives, right, and doesn't want this kind of information being, like, widely available to people. That's part of the reason why they do things like put in a no-fly zone, which is effectively like a standing threat that any planes that fly over Venezuela could just be shot down by the United States, right? So I want to just say another thank you to Allison for, like, you know, taking that step to actually go there and bring this information back to people here. So we're going to move on to Q&A. If folks have any questions for Allison or myself as well about, like, what we saw in Venezuela, if there's anything that you heard today or saw today that you want expanded on, yeah, the floor is open. I'll take any hands if people have them. Yeah, go ahead.
What was the process like of going to Venezuela and going to customs and, like, coming back to the United States and going to customs, and what your experience was?
Could folks hear the question? Everybody able to? Okay, cool.
Cool. Going to, well, aside from having to do multiple connecting flights and, like, traveling over 24 hours, I actually had a crazy experience getting into Venezuela in a good way, comparing it to flying in the US, even not, like, flying in out of the country. Like, I had my visa, I had, like, all of these things, and then we get to customs in Venezuela, and, like, my shit's just not popping up electronically. Like, I'm, like, panicking. I don't have my, like, info, thinking that, like, they're gonna be like, oh my God, like, I'm gonna get detained or something. And they were like, oh, that's fine. Like, we're just gonna sit here until you can get it. Like, you can just hang out over here, it's fine. They were really casual, very nice. And, like, it was a similar, I mean, we still had to, like, check in with our passport. It was pretty similar to, like, the border at the US. I haven't traveled to many other countries, so I don't know if it's that different to anywhere else. But then coming back to the US, I didn't have that hard of a time. I think by the time I was flying into customs in Miami, everyone who was working that night was overworked and did not want to deal with me. They actually barely looked at my passport, so both ways were not very bad, outside of having to do, like, 3 or 4 connecting flights.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've seen some of the pictures. I was just curious, like, who are the other people from the U.S. that went, the organizations, were they with, where were they from, and have you been doing anything, keeping up with them, or doing anything?
Yeah, so there was 11 of us. There was one attendee from New York, and they did stuff with Students for Democratic Society. There was one person who did stuff with NARPR, which I need to remember.
The National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression.
Thank you. And they were from Milwaukee. There was another comrade there from Michigan who did anti-war work and Palestine solidarity work. There were a couple other people on the delegation who I did not get to talk very much with. We were all just kind of, like, overlapping in, like, our itineraries. But yeah, we kind of all, another person from Chicago who was also in anti-war work. And we were all, a few of us were under the umbrella of the Anti-War Action Network, which is, like, a national network in the US. And then, yeah, several people from the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. But yeah, we did a webinar together. I don't know if I said that, but we've been keeping up, keeping in touch with Instagram. One person from Michigan just like went super viral for getting arrested during an interview that they were doing on live TV for a Venezuela protest that they had earlier that day. It's kind of crazy.
Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, well, we, the delegates got to stay in a really like fancy Marriott hotel. And we kind of really just were like bused from this hotel to this like where the conference was like a military building. But looking out the windows and stuff, there was a ton of houses. Actually, I'll go back to, like, it really just looked like this everywhere. Just a lot of houses on these mountains. There wasn't, like, they looked fine. Like, things were maybe outdated in some areas. There were definitely, like, houses that needed windows and other things, but also like it really looked like a combination of like Hollywood and New York. I'm not gonna lie. There were massive billboards everywhere. It was like a huge city. It just looked like that.
Yeah, I'll just add, like, when I was in Caracas, one of the things I was talking with another member of the anti-war committee who went with me at that time, a couple of years ago, about, like, you do see, like, a mixture of a lot of different types of housing throughout the country, right? We saw a lot of these, like, massive new development projects that are, like, I kind of mentioned earlier. But you also see like you know, what people would call like favelas, right? But we were just like, at that time when we were there was a period where Minneapolis was doing these like really heavy encampment sweeps, right? And like trashing people's belongings. And anyways, I just remember like looking out the window of like a bus at a favela and being like, you know, the government here is like trying to do more to provide people with like higher quality housing with like more like, you know, modern electricity, plumbing, et cetera, that like may not be available everywhere. But they also aren't like bulldozing these neighborhoods, you know what I mean? Like they're not like stripping people of their homes. I don't know. It was just like it was quite a contrast, I guess, to see, is what I'm trying to get across. Yeah, go ahead.
One of the big talking points I keep, and we all hear it, is that, you know, all the after Maduro was kidnapped, Venezuelans are dancing. And I'm curious, as two people who have been there, what would your response to that be?
Well, I would like, I'm still in group chats with people that I met in Venezuela, for one, and none of them are celebrating. I think it's like really important to understand that this country just got bombed and attacked. They're under heavy U.S. sanctions, heavy blockades, and they're out in the streets rallying, but they're rallying to like defend their country and defend their leader. They're demanding President Maduro be returned. So I would just say, like, focusing on Venezuelans in Venezuela, like, there aren't celebrations there.
Yeah, I actually, I saw, like, I don't know, maybe a week ago, like in the New York Times, like a photo of people rallying, you know, at a rally that's like, defend Venezuela, like in Venezuela, right? Defend the government. We stand with the government. We want to defend the country. And the caption of the photo is like, very, you know, pro government rally in Caracas. There have been almost no anti-government rallies in the country. This must surely be because, like, people are afraid they'll get shot if they, rally against the government, right? Which, to me, having been there and talked to people, and I did thankfully have time while I was there to just, like, tour the country, and like I said earlier, just talk to people on the street, like literally just stop people and ask them questions and about their lives and stuff. And like, yeah, overwhelmingly people said like, yeah, I wish life in the country was better. Obviously, like, it's been pretty hard, but overwhelmingly people said the U.S. sanctions are what's making life miserable here. I will say I met a few anti-Maduro people while I was here, but or while I was there. But some of them kind of reminded me almost of, like, I don't know, they had like strange. In most cases, they had like kind of almost strange conspiratorial ideas. Like the most common thing I heard from people who were really opposed to the Maduro administration was that they're deliberately sabotaging the Venezuelan economy because Maduro controls the value of the U.S. dollar. And I would like challenge people on that. Like, well, I'm from the U.S. I don't really understand how your president here would control the value of the U.S. current. Like, it just is like, it wasn't making sense to me. And people just kind of told me that I'm, brainwashed, and they've seen, you know what I mean? Like, there's some like very odd propaganda, I guess, that I encountered while I was there. So, kind of speaking to that point about like, that narrative that's going on in the media. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe I misunderstood this. So, are the citizens given weapons to defend their country?
Yeah, the country. So for in the communes, they have groups called colectivos, which are like sort of citizens defense organizations. Like anyone can sign up, right? And I think people there compared it sort of to like our National Guard in the sense that like you're not like always on duty or whatever, but like you have training every so often, and you've basically signed up like if the country is attacked, I will defend my country, right? And I will defend my commune specifically with the colectivos. The colectivos I've actually now seen in recent days described in the U.S. press as like armed gangs. They're not, right? Like they're part of the commune infrastructure that people organize their own self-defense. Like that's part of the democratic structure of those communes. But more recently, there's been a big mobilization effort, a call to the people of the country to, like, people who want to fight if the U.S. invades are like invited to fight, to be trained, to be given arms so that they are ready to defend their country, and that's been a very big call. And yeah, like Allison was mentioning earlier, I don't think having an open call to people to like be put under arms and to be given military training is the kind of thing you do if you're terrified of your population, Thank you very much for that question. It's a very good question. Any other folks? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know a ton about the communes, but like how many people live in communes? Do they like vary in size?
I think they do vary in sizes all over. We only got to see this one commune, and we, like I said, we were there for 2.5 days, and we were really packing everything in. So it was kind of a tour, speedy tour. And I actually didn't catch how many people live there, but it was a larger, it was one of the larger communes. And I think they maybe mentioned that there was like a few hundred people who were in that commune. But Andrew might have more to add to that. If you do.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't have more to add in the sense that, yeah, like it varies a lot, and like there are many communes throughout the country, and they're all very different. I'll just add like an example of a very different type of commune I saw when I was in the center of the country, where it's a lot of agricultural and industrial sort of like heavy industry and stuff. There was a big section of the neighborhood that was a commune, and it sort of bordered onto a bunch of agricultural land, and that was a very like agriculture oriented commune that was the peasant associations there like worked that land, and then they distributed food to feed their whole commune, and they had progressed to the point where they could feed, in fact, like a large section of that, like a basically a suburb, like a huge neighborhood on the outside of the city. So they orient, at least my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of them like orient towards like what they can produce locally and like what makes the most sense for them to produce, and in order to like feed or clothe or produce what makes the most sense for them to produce, and then exchange with other communes in a lot of cases. I think the one we talked to, they talked about exchanging agricultural products with another local commune that was more in the core of the city, that was a lot more heavy industry for like industrial products, and it wasn't even like a lot of like cash changing hands really, if that makes sense. It was like a kind of organized production between those two communes.
Cool. Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay.
But yeah.
Any other questions from folks? Yeah, go ahead.
This question's for both of you. Heard a lot about the kind of resources, petroleum that Venezuela has. But I'm kind of wondering, I've really heard this, did anyone talk on the trip about how they're very dependent upon it, and their economy is kind of make or break petroleum? Did anyone talk about kind of bringing that dependency or diversifying when you live a very short vein? Maybe you get into like talked about that, but yeah, I know it's hard with the way the relationship works with global finance, but anyway, did anyone talk about that or envisioning like a diversified economy or something we could grow on their base currently?
I unfortunately did not. We did not get into that too much on our trip.
Well, I actually did get to hear about that some while I was there, both from sort of just like normal people just talking about it, and also from like a few politicians that I got to meet with. And the perspectives that I heard while I was there is that like, yes, it is a problem, that we do want to diversify our economy, and the sanctions are making it much harder to do so. And actually the clearest, I kind of already alluded to this earlier, but the clearest example of that is in terms of like food sovereignty. To say a little bit more about it, like it's a really good example of this exact problem. At one point, there was an era of Venezuela that Venezuelans refer to as Saudi Venezuela, where like these big oil companies basically ran the country, and the country was so, I mean, it's still very dependent on oil, but at that time it was like everything is about exporting oil and importing goods, like all other goods are imported. And the people I was talking to about this were saying like, yeah, when I was growing up, like people are like middle-aged, saying when I was growing up, we in the grocery store you'd have like imported like coffee and like imported chocolate. And like chocolate actually has never been grown in Venezuela, even though it has one of the best climates in the world for growing chocolate. But it was like just easier and cheaper to just import this stuff from other countries by selling oil. And so, and that was true of like a lot of agricultural products. And so when the sanctions hit and that was cut, right, and they couldn't import food, there was such a like lack of a indigenous agricultural base to draw upon. And that made, I mean, that like literally starved people to death, right? But like that's a really good example of what Sean's talking about, of like the pitfalls of the economy being so dependent on oil. And in the case of agriculture, they actually have like incredibly reversed that in like to like a large degree. But my understanding is that they would like to diversify the economy a lot more in general, to be far less dependent on it, because it is like a vulnerability of their economy. Yeah, absolutely. Any more questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Even just like hearing support from the industry, like even hearing it is like inspiring. Like this is a really inspiring trip. And I was just wondering, like aside from this report and like these perspectives and just being able to see stuff with your own eyes, like how
Yeah, I think so. I'm just, it was truly a life-changing, like, trip. And I think that says a lot for only being there for 2 days. I think that the whole emphasis was just like connecting all these struggles, which I think I already knew, right? But it is really different to go there and like really see that in action. And so, yeah, that's like lighting a fire under my butt to come home and like really actually connect all these struggles, especially now, like, I did not know I'd be coming home to like seeing President Maduro be kidnapped, Caracas bombed, all within the same week that ICE murders someone in our city. Meanwhile, Israel is still violating this like ceasefire. It just like really hits home that like, yeah, we just need to organize and be in the street and connect all these struggles and like really point these out to everyone. I just think that really like solidified that in my brain.
Well, Allison, is there a way that people could get involved and join you
Yes.
to do that?
You should definitely join an organization, but the Minnesota Anti-War Committee does have a new members meeting tomorrow night at 7 p.m. at the 4200 building. No one knows what that means, but it's on 4200 Cedar. If anyone's interested to get started somewhere.
And I believe we will be painting a Venezuela banner and talking about planning a Venezuela protest. So if you want to get involved with this issue specifically, tomorrow night's meeting would be a great way to do so.
Great, yeah, thank you.
If there are any last questions, we're happy to take them. But if not, thank you so much for coming out. I really hope we'll see you either at our new members meeting or at any of our upcoming events. We're going to continue to organize against war with Venezuela and to free President Maduro. And we'll see you in the streets. And please, if you don't already, follow us at AntiWarMN on Instagram to see those events. Thank you so much and have a great night.
Thank you.